Welcome to the Daily AI News, brought to you by the Day After AI News channel.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. It is Sunday, February 22, 2026. And, if you have been scrolling through the headlines this week and feeling, a distinct sense of vertigo, rest assured you're definitely not the only one.
Oh, vertigo is definitely the right word. It really has been one of those weeks where the scale of absolutely everything just seemed to, double overnight.
It really has, because we aren't just talking about, a shiny new gadget this week or some slightly faster chatbot.
Right.
We are talking about the fundamental rules of the road being rewritten here. I mean, we have 88 countries, and these are countries that usually cannot even agree on what to have for lunch, agreeing on a massive plan to democratize AI.
Which is huge.
Yeah. And then we have Sam Altman getting incredibly defensive, and I mean really pushing back, about how much water these systems are actually drinking. And on top of all that, we have a bill moving through Missouri, of all places, named after a pop star, that might actually change how we handle our own digital identities forever.
Yeah, it really feels like we've entered a distinct new phase of the AI era. Like if the last few years, say 2023 to 2025, if those were the wow, look at the magic trick years.
Yeah, the honeymoon phase.
Exactly. Then 2026 is rapidly becoming the, okay, how do we actually survive living in the theater phase, We're seeing a maturation. We are moving from the laboratory to the legislature and from the data center to the actual global geopolitical stage.
Which is exactly where we need to be. It's becoming less about the magic and more about the infrastructure needed to just keep the show running without burning down the building.
Or running out of water to put out the fire.
Right. So our mission for you today is to unpack these massive shifts. We're going to break this deep dive down into a few main buckets.
That's good.
First, we are heading to New Delhi to figure out what those 88 nations just signed and why it matters to you. Then we're going to get a bit in the weeds, or I guess the water wars, regarding the real environmental cost of a single query.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one.
And finally, we're going to look at why AI is now writing its own security patches and what that actually means for the humans who, used to do that job.
And we'll make sure to touch on some really interesting shifts in the physical grid itself, plus some actually good news about using AI to help us breathe a little easier.
Yes, let's definitely end on a high note, so let's dive right in, starting with the heavy hitters. The AI Impact Summit 2026 just wrapped up in New Delhi. And honestly, when I looked at the guest list for this thing, I thought there's a typo.
I know, it was a totally stacked deck. You had 88 nations plus major international organizations all converging to sign this thing called the New Delhi Declaration.
Right.
But you're right, the guest list is the real story here. You had the United States, China, Russia, Iran, the European Union, Cuba, all putting their signatures on the exact same document.
Which sounds less like a summit and more like the setup to a very tense joke. I mean, it is incredibly rare to see the U.S., China, and Russia agree on the time-of day, let alone a framework for the most powerful technology on Earth. What actually brought them to the table?
Urgency, pure urgency. And I think a shared realization that if they don't agree on some basic guardrails, things get messy for everyone very quickly.
Yeah.
The whole summit was actually guided by a Sanskrit principle. Sarvajan Yataya, Sarvajan Sukhaya.
Okay, my Sanskrit's a little rusty. What's the translation on that one?
It roughly translates to welfare for all, happiness for all.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it sounds very idealistic, almost a bit kumbaya. But the core philosophy here is actually hard-nosed pragmatism. The idea is that AI cannot simply be a toy for the superpowers, because if it remains that way, it destabilizes the rest of the world. It really needs to be treated as a public good.
Welfare for all is a great slogan, for sure. But we have seen these global summits before, right? Everyone flies in, they eat a nice dinner, shake hands, take the big group photo, and then go home and ignore absolutely everything they just signed. Is there any actual meat on the bone here?
I'd say this one feels different because of how it's structured. They organized the declaration around 7 pillars, which the Indian government referred to as chakras, and these cover very specific, actionable goals. Things like democratizing AI resources, pushing AI for science, and creating what they call a trusted AI commons.
Pause on that for a second. A trusted AI commons. That sounds like a shared Google Drive for nations. What does that actually look like in practice?
That's a good way to picture it, actually. Think of it as a shared repository of the basic building blocks, because right now, instead of every nation having to reinvent the wheel or worse, buy the wheel at a massive premium from a U.S. tech giant, there's this big push to create open source ecosystem, shared benchmarks, accessible tools. The main deliverable they agreed on was a charter for the democratic diffusion of AI.
Democratic diffusion. That is quite the mouthful.
It is diplomatic speak, yes, but it's targeting a very real problem, which is the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Developing nations, places like Bhutan or Suriname, who are also signatories, by the way, they are terrified of becoming data colonies.
Data colonies. Wow, that's a really strong term.
It is, but it perfectly fits the fear. They don't want to just be consumers who pay a monthly subscription fee to California just to access intelligence.
Oh, I see.
They want to build their own models, solve for their own local problems, and in their own languages. So this charter is about ensuring they have the affordable connectivity and the actual computing resources to participate in the building process, not just the buying process.
So it's essentially trying to prevent a world where 3 companies in Silicon Valley basically run the operating system for the entire planet.
That is the absolute crux of it. It's all about data sovereignty and economic equity. If the Global South misses this boat, the economic gap between them and the Global North becomes completely unbridgeable. This declaration is their attempt to build a ramp before the ship sails.
That makes total sense. You don't want to be importing intelligence your whole life. You really want to cultivate it locally.
Exactly.
But speaking of Silicon Valley and the sheer physical resources required to run this massive ship, let's pivot to the second part of our deep dive, the environmental debate. Because while the diplomats are shaking hands in New Delhi, back in the server rooms, the temperature is definitely rising.
Literally rising, yes. The physical cost of AI, the water, the power, it's been a simmering controversy for a while now. But this week, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, decided to just take the lid right off the pot.
Yeah, he gave some interviews recently. Specifically, I saw pieces in the Indian Express of Business Today where he really went on the offensive. He didn't just defend their resource usage. He actively attacked the critics.
He was unusually forceful about it. See, there's been this statistic circulating for a while that a single query on ChatGPT uses something like 17 gallons of water.
Which is wild.
Right, and Altman came out swinging. He called that claim totally fake and insane.
I mean, 17 gallons does sound like a massive amount of water just for asking, what's the capital of Montana? I could see why he'd push back on that specifically. That's practically a bathtub full of water.
Exactly. And he clarified that while they used to use evaporative cooling in data centers, which absolutely does consume water, they've moved away from that in many of their newer designs.
Okay.
He also completely debunked the claim that one query equals an iPhone battery charge. He says the real number is way, way less than that. But then, and this is the part that got everyone talking, he made a pivot that I think is going to be debated for a long time. He moved from physics to philosophy.
I read this part. He started comparing the energy cost of AI to the energy cost of a human being.
He did. And it's a very provocative argument. He basically said, look, it takes a lot of energy to train a human, too.
Okay. He pointed out that to get a human smart enough to answer a complex PhD-level question, you need 20 years of life, food, education, housing, plus the evolutionary history of billions of people.
Okay, hold on. Is he really saying, don't look at the energy of the server for that 1 second. Compare it to raising a human child for 2 decades. That feels like a massive deflection. It's comparing a biological necessity to a commercial software product.
It is a classic apples to oranges comparison designed to shift the frame. His argument is essentially that we shouldn't judge the energy of the query itself, but the energy of the outcome.
I guess I see the logic, but still.
He's suggesting the fair comparison is, how much energy does it take a trained AI to solve a problem versus a trained human solving that exact same problem? And he argues AI is actually vastly more efficient on a per-task basis.
I mean, sure, if you completely ignore the fact that the human has to exist anyway. We don't breed humans just to answer search queries.
Right.
But is he actually right about the water usage? Or is this just clever PR to get regulators off his back? It's nuanced. On a strict per-query basis, Google recently claimed they use less than 0.3 milliliters of water per query.
Oh, wow. That's like a thimble.
It's a tiny amount.
Yeah.
So Altman is right that the 17 gallons figure is hyperbole, and this is a massive, but we really have to look at the aggregate.
Right, because there isn't just one query happening. There are billions of them every day.
Exactly. And the UK Government Digital Sustainability Alliance just put out a report predicting that AI could drive global water usage from 1.1 billion cubic meters to 6.6 billion by 2027.
Wait, 1.1 to 6.6 billion? That is a 6-fold increase in just 1 year. That is staggering.
It really is. And the core problem is that water is intensely local. You can transmit data globally in milliseconds, but you cannot easily transmit water globally. The Independent actually reported that Thames Water in the UK is already warning about restrictions for data centers. And they noted that 68% of data centers are located near key biodiversity areas. So while Altman might be totally right that a single thought from the AI is hyper-efficient, the sheer scale of the machine thinking constantly is putting immense stress on local water basins.
It really feels like we were running headfirst into a wall of physics. We have this software that can do almost anything, but it lives on hardware that is completely constrained by the fact that we live on a planet with finite physical resources. You just can't code your way out of a local drought.
No, you can't. And that harsh constraint is driving a radical change in how we build the infrastructure itself. Which actually brings us to our third topic. If we can't just build bigger and bigger data centers because we run out of power and water at a single physical site, what do we do?
Right, we have to change the architecture entirely. And this week, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, HPE, started talking about a new concept they're calling AI factory grids.
This is a really crucial shift in thinking. The old model was basically scale up. You build a massive concrete bunker somewhere, you stuff it with as many GPUs as physically possible, and you just hope the local power plant doesn't explode.
A bit stressful for the local grid.
Very. So the new model is scale across.
Scale across. Okay, so instead of building one giant brain, it's a network of smaller brains.
Exactly. Think of it as a distributed nervous system. The idea is to connect multiple data centers using extremely high-performance Ethernet, specifically using new tech like NVIDIA Spectrum X, so that they can act as one giant distributed system.
But doesn't that make the whole thing slower?
Right.
Usually, if I have to send heavy data from one building to another, or worse, one city to another, there's significant lag.
That has always been the bottleneck historically, but the new interconnect technology is getting so incredibly fast that the lag is becoming negligible, even for training these massive models. And going distributed like this solves two huge problems.
Let me guess. One is the resource constraint we just talked about.
Exactly. You can put one center in a windy place to take advantage of wind power, and put another one in a really cold place to naturally handle the cooling.
And they just work together on the exact same problem simultaneously. That's incredibly smart.
It is, but the second problem it solves ties right back to the very first thing we talked about today, sovereignty. Remember the New Delhi Declaration?
Right, countries desperately wanting to keep their own data within their own borders.
Yes. An AI factory grid allows a country like, say, Australia or France to keep its highly sensitive data strictly on its own soil in its own local data center, but they can still connect to a global grid to borrow the massive computing power needed to process it.
Oh, that's clever.
It breaks that total reliance on a single, massive US-based data center. It's much more resilient, it's sovereign, and it beautifully distributes the energy load.
Okay, so we have the diplomats signing treaties to share the tech, the CEOs debating the physics of the tech, and the engineers literally redesigning the power grid to run the tech. But we haven't talked about the lawyers yet, because you obviously can't have a massive new technology without a whole new set of laws.
Naturally. And that brings us to Missouri.
Of all places, right.
Yeah.
But this is actually a really significant piece of legislation being called the Taylor Swift Act.
Named, obviously, after the extremely high-profile deepfake incident involving her images a little while back. But the bill itself, which is sponsored by Republican Representative Wendy Hausman, goes much further than just protecting massive pop stars.
Right, and it's important to note this isn't just about copyright infringement. This bill explicitly targets deepfakes and AI-generated sexual content. And looking at the draft, it has real teeth. It proposes making it a felony to threaten to disclose such images to harm someone's reputation. We're talking up to 4 years in prison or 10 years for subsequent offenses.
That is a very significant deterrent. But what I find most interesting, legally speaking, is the civil remedy aspect of it.
Meaning you can actually sue the person who made it.
Yes, directly. If your likeness is used without written consent, you can sue for damages in civil court. And critically, this bill protects children and teens. It allows guardians to sue even if the depiction isn't sexual at all. Just the unauthorized use of a child's likeness by AI is enough.
Which is huge for parents. We've heard so many horror stories about bullying in high schools involving AI-generated images where the school says their hands are tied and the police say technically no crime was committed.
Right, this law directly fills that gap. And this bill is really part of a broader patchwork of state laws emerging across the U.S. right now. Texas, New Jersey, and a few others are doing very similar things.
Because the federal government is lagging behind.
Exactly. Because federal regulation in Washington is moving so slowly, the states are just stepping in to fill the vacuum.
Though I did read there was some pushback in the state committee hearings.
A little bit, yeah. There is always tension when lawmakers try to move this fast on tech. There are currently 7 different bills on the table in Missouri alone regarding this specific issue.
Wow, 7!
Yeah, so some lawmakers are saying, whoa, slow down, let's make sure we don't accidentally ban something legitimate or create a massive legal mess. But the momentum is undeniable at this point. The public is scared, and they want real protection from having their faces stolen.
It's fascinating that we are scrambling to use human laws to control AI behavior, but at the exact same time, AI is starting to control its own behavior, which actually brings us to probably the most sci-fi headline of the entire week. Anthropic just released a new feature called Claude Code Security.
Yeah, this is where things get a little meta, and frankly, a little unnerving for the traditional software industry.
Right, so Claude isn't just a chatbot that helps you brainstorm emails anymore. This new feature actively scans code bases to find deep vulnerabilities. But it doesn't just circle the error in red pen and leave it for a human. It actually fixes it.
That is the fundamental shift right there. We are moving from an era of logging and alerting, where a software system just tells a human, hey, this looks bad, you should check it out, to an era of reasoning and fixing. The AI understands the logic of the code, finds the flaw, and repairs it on its own.
But the detail that really made my jaw drop was a comment from Anthropic's chief product officer, Mike Krieger. He revealed that Anthropic employees use Claude to write effectively 100% of their own code now. He said, and I quote, Claude is being written by Claude.
And that statement sent a very real shiver through the market. Cybersecurity stocks like CrowdStrike and Cloudflare actually dropped when this news hit the wire.
But why? If security is getting better and faster, isn't that a good thing for everyone?
Well, it's good for the concept of security, but maybe bad for the business of security. The underlying fear is that if AI can write perfectly secure code from day one and instantly fix its own bugs, do we even need the massive multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity industry we have today?
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Although Alon Cinnamon from Viola Ventures pushes back on that, he argues that we definitely still need the industry, but the day-to-day job changes completely.
How so? Does it just become managing the AI?
It becomes a hyper-accelerated cat-and-mouse game. If the defenders have AI that can patch holes instantly, you better believe the attackers will use AI to find new, microscopic holes instantly.
So the humans move from being the ones digging the trenches to essentially being the generals directing these automated armies.
Exactly. We become the auditors, the strategists. But the actual grunt work of typing out the code, that is rapidly being handed over to the models themselves.
Claude is being written by Claude. I'm genuinely going to be thinking about that one for a while. It feels like the loop is closing, doesn't it?
It creates a fascinating and maybe terrifying feedback loop. The smarter the model gets, the better it codes the next version of itself, which makes it even smarter, which makes it code better.
Okay, let's not go too far down that rabbit hole, or neither of us will sleep tonight.
Fair enough.
Before we wrap up, we always want to zoom out and look at some of the global players and positive use cases. Because it isn't all just doom and gloom and deepfakes. We mentioned the New Delhi Declaration earlier, but India isn't just hosting summits. They are actively building models.
Yes, definitely keep an eye on Sarvam AI. They just launched a new chat app called Indus.
Indus. And this is a model designed specifically for the Indian market, right?
It is. It's a 105 billion parameter model, which is substantial. It's not the biggest in the world by any means, but it is very, very capable. But the key differentiator here is that it handles both text and audio seamlessly, and it's built from the ground up for Indian languages.
Which is absolutely crucial because so much of the foundational internet is English first.
Exactly. This is a direct challenge to the U.S. monopoly on large language models. It really shows that the democratic diffusion we talked about earlier is already happening in real time. India is building its own brain.
And over in Europe, we're seeing AI applied to physical defense in a very specific way, something called the drone wall.
Right. This is a direct response to the geopolitical instability in that region. 5 EU nations, France, the UK, Germany, Poland, and Italy, are all teaming up. They are taking expertise learned directly from the war in Ukraine to build networks of low-cost drone interceptors. It's essentially a defensive shield powered by AI coordination.
It really shows how AI is reshaping not just digital borders, but actual national security borders. But let's end this on a high note, a true AI for good story. And this one is about air pollution.
This is such a great application of the technology because it deals with a problem that is simply too vast and complex for humans to track manually. We know that air pollution kills roughly 7 million people annually worldwide.
Which is a heartbreaking statistic.
It really is. And the core problem for policymakers has always been data, knowing exactly where the invisible pollution is coming from and predicting where it will drift in real time.
So how is AI finally fixing that?
There are projects like AIR in South Africa and another one called AirCrow, which operates across 16 different African cities. They are using AI to instantly analyze massive streams of data from low-cost local sensors and satellites. There's even a specific tool called AirTrans that uses satellite AI to give early warnings.
So instead of just looking out your window and seeing smog when it's already too late, you get actionable, predictive data that can actually save lives.
Exactly. It can predict pollution hotspots days before they become critical, allowing local authorities to intervene or just warning vulnerable people to stay indoors and protect themselves. It's a perfect example of AI processing incredibly complex, messy environmental data to produce a very simple human benefit, just helping people breathe cleaner air.
I love that. So let's recap the massive journey we've been on today. We have 88 countries shaking hands in New Delhi to try and democratize this power. We have Sam Altman arguing that AI is somehow more energy efficient than raising a human. We have states passing felony laws to protect our faces from deepfakes. We have electrical grids physically expanding and distributing to handle the computing load. And we have AI writing its own code to secure itself.
It is an awful lot to process for 1 week. But if I can leave you with just one final thought to chew on.
Please do.
We talked about Anthropic using Claude to write Claude, and we talked about building these massive distributed grids because single human-managed data centers just can't cope with the demand anymore. It really feels like we're rapidly approaching a tipping point where humans are moving from being the creators of the system to merely the auditors of the system. We are building a machine that builds itself, powers itself through distributed grids, and defends itself from attacks. The profound question is, are we really ready to just be the supervisors? And more importantly, are we ready for the massive planetary energy bill that comes with resigning ourselves to that role?
Man, that is a heavy thought for a Sunday, but that is exactly why we do this deep dive. Thank you for joining us today on The Day After. Stay curious, everyone.
Before you go, please subscribe to the podcast Prime. And if you enjoyed today's episode, hit like to support us. Thanks for listening and see you next time.